Welcome back to the FinTech conference here on Business Tech. And it's all about imagining a new world, imagining a world where financial technology can make our lives easier. Now, imagine a world without cash, where every cent is actually swiped and money is just this invisible thing, no longer made out of paper and coins. Now, imagine that kind of an African society where you see those tattered, multiple folded and wrinkled notes have pretty much less value than the virtual card in your phone or in your back pocket. Now, exactly 2 years ago, when COVID-19 first hit, the World Health Organization and the Central Bank of Kenya discouraged the use of cash transactions, and they strongly encourage cashless via M-Pesa and plastic. Here in South Africa, we've seen a big rise in the use of, well, I use Zapper and SnapScan, but there are a whole host of digital payments and contactless payments. But, and there's a big but, despite this and despite the pandemic, cash is still king in Africa. So are we just destined to dream about a cashless society, or can it actually become a reality? Well, let's welcome our next speaker to find out. She's very close to the payments world and how it's evolving. Chipo Mushwana, Divisional Executive of Emerging Payments at Nedbank. Welcome to the conference. Is digitalization a solution for Africa's economic development?
Well, thanks for having me. And you're so right. Digitization is really the answer to a lot of the issues that we have, particularly on the African continent. We've got issues of financial inclusion, right? Underbanked populations across the entire continent. So we desperately need to digitize our payment systems to be able to include a lot more people. I read an interesting article yesterday, I think it was by the IMF actually, and they were saying 85% of all South Africans hold a bank account. That's exciting and that's interesting, which means we've made strides in terms of getting people to be banked, but people are underbanked. So digitization is extremely important. But when it comes to payments, like me and you, the payments must be accessible, they must be safe, and they must be seamless. Outside of that, then we see it falling flat. And when we talk about digitization of payments, the one thing we need to think about, we always think about the cool, sexy stuff, like you just mentioned, SnapScan, Zapper, or we can talk about all these other cool digital wallets. But we forget that where digitization needs to happen is across the entire value chain. So it's not just me having the ability to have a virtual card or being able to perform a digital payment, but it's the merchant that should be able to receive that digital payment. And particularly in low-income markets and communities, that is where a lot of the hard work and heavy lifting needs to be done.
Yeah, and we see the likes of Yoka and others making great strides in those markets, but still so much more needs to be done. And you can open it up to broader financial services, credit scoring and giving people insurance and building wealth. It really is fundamental to how we progress African society. Now, from that vantage point, there's lots of technology. I almost can't keep up. The more things change, the faster they seem to change. What are the trends in technologies that you see driving payments at present?
So there's quite a few trends that we can chat through, such as next generation payment methods. So you spoke about invisible payments. And the classic example is Uber, for example. You don't think about paying, you never remove your card to do anything. That's typically an invisible payment or embedded payment. So you don't think about it, it's seamless, it's automated. So that is a big key trend that we see, and we call it embedded finance. And a lot of people refer to it as payment 4X era. And it was really accelerated by COVID, like you set out at the very beginning. And these next generation payments are also quite important from a Nedbank perspective. You spoke about Yoko, for example. Nedbank came out with something called Tap on Phone. And it was a first in Africa invention that basically says, me and you can accept digital payments using the mobile handset that you have in your pocket right now. So you don't need to have extra cash to buy the hardware. You don't need to worry about connectivity when you see the guys raising the point of sale machine, etc. Effectively, the phone you have becomes a digital payment acceptance mechanism. That is what we're talking about when we talk about socioeconomic development, when we talk about digitization of payments, not only in South Africa, but on the African continent. And we put Africa on the map and joining 18 other countries to be able to run this pilot globally. We've also had other things such as Money Message, which effectively allows me and you to perform transaction using WhatsApp without ever needing to leave the WhatsApp platform. And we've had so many stories around WhatsApp, but we've worked with the team there, and it's encrypted and it's safe and it's secure. So all these payment capabilities, we call them next generation payment methods, and they're effectively low cost and allowing me and you to transact seamlessly easily through channels and methods that we understand. The other important one that enables all these things to happen is the digital ID. So let me give you a very basic example. Think about your Apple ID, and it opens up this world or this ecosystem where you can buy music and subscribe to Apple TV, etc. So that is really the function of a digital ID. And we need to have a functional digital ID at a national level and probably at a continent level for us to be able to have these seamless, fully digitized, fully KYC'd payments running through across borders and between individuals like me and you. Other things that we're seeing, obviously, is payments as a service. So when you think about open banking and the advantages that that brings, particularly in the finance space, the ability for me and you to be able to exchange data across different organizations so payments can be settled. A lot of people say, I want to receive my money in 5 seconds. And we see that in other markets, right? And thankfully, our regulator is on the ball with that. But we need to begin to have open data conversations and set out the right rules and parameters for these things to be able to happen. So real-time payments is important. Final trend I think I can speak to that becomes important for all this is cybersecurity. So with payments involved, it's people's money, and we cannot take that for granted. So cybersecurity is at the forefront of all the stuff that we're doing. So machine learning, artificial intelligence, all these things become paramount and become anchors for us to be able to deliver these great payment capabilities and fully digitize the experience for everybody.
Well, there's so much to unpack there, but I want to touch on the issue of cost, because I was reading a World Bank report recently, and they used the example in East Africa where last year the fee for sending $200 in remittances from Tanzania to neighboring Uganda was 23% for a Ugandan migrant. Now, I cannot begin to imagine giving up nearly a quarter of my income every month just to send that money somewhere. So there's huge potential to make people's lives significantly better through this technology. How do you see these trends playing out? And what do you see as the factors that are going to influence the success or otherwise of their rollout?
So at the very beginning, you touched on something extremely important, and that's cost. And cost is driven by a couple of parties within the payment value chain, right? But most importantly, regulation has to play an important role. I say our regulators must do what they should do, and that's to regulate. And one of those things is really around cost, because if the costs are prohibitive for either the provider of the service or the receiver of the funds, in this instance, cross-border, then we see that all these payment capabilities that are great and nifty and awesome really don't see the light of day. A classic example I use, particularly in the South African context, is QR codes, right? When you go to Asia, QR codes are like prolific, they're everywhere, right? And so why don't we have them here in South Africa? And those are conversations and sort of things we need to begin to unpack with our regulator and all the other players in the value chain, card associations, other banks, etc., to say, how do we lower the cost of some of these payment capabilities and this payment method? So that is extremely important. Cross-border remittance, like you mentioned, it's a huge thing on the African continent. Migrants cannot afford to part with even $1 of whatever it is that they get. So we really need to be cognizant, and we need to be money experts that do good and be conscious around what we offer and cater for the lower end of the market, because that is where a lot of the economic activity and the socioeconomic development is going to happen, even within the South African context. To support entrepreneurs, we need to make sure that they can access payment capabilities. It's not just loans, offices, etc. It's the actual ability to transact remotely, as we saw with COVID, the ability to transact face-to-face, the ability to have e-commerce platforms set up with ease. All these things are becoming extremely important. And I think regulation, but also big banks. Big banks have got massive resources, whether it be compliance, KYC. We do this so well. And I think we have a responsibility to play a key role in ensuring that we're able to offer these payment capabilities to everybody that actually needs them.
Now, I mentioned Asia and QR codes being everywhere. I've always been a big fan of South Africa's financial services industry. I think it's very well developed. It's often ranked very highly by the World Economic Forum, and one of those pillars that's really holding up rather well, while many other things, let's not even talk about Eskom, are falling over. But how well is South Africa keeping up with global payments trends, considering that it does sound like maybe Asia is stealing a bit of a march here? Do you think we're punching above our weight, below our weight? Where would you say we are at the moment?
We're actually doing extremely well. So if I think about things like central bank digital currencies, which we see making a lot of headway or noise globally, we're actually doing very well from that perspective. When I think about real-time payments that we spoke about, there's a big industry project that's happening right now. You probably have seen it in the media, rapid payments, etc. That's modeled on markets such as Asia, Thailand, etc. Settlement within 4, 5, 10 seconds maximum, me and you'll be able to send payments to each other. So I think we're doing extremely well. And even on the open finance, so we were the first country and Nedbank was the first bank to actually pioneer open banking. Now that is key and it's significant. And our regulator has actually taken Nedbank on board to be able to inform a lot of the sort of conversations and way forward. And it's exciting because we're seeing other banks coming on board. We're seeing fintech businesses, we're seeing tech giants, we're seeing retailers, telcos, and everybody coming to the party. But we really, really are doing extremely well. So I wouldn't say we're punching below our weight, and I wouldn't say we are punching out so that we're unreachable. I think we're doing extremely well in our financial services system.
I'm really encouraged to hear that there's that level of collaboration going on, because my mind casts back to 10, 15 years ago. A lot of the fintechs would come onto my show and say, Michael, it's like an endless beauty parade. You get invited, you line up, they walk up and down the line, they look at you, but you never get invited to the dance. And increasingly, I'm hearing about big banks with that back-end capability and their heft actually going into partnership with some of these fintechs, and this collaboration between yourselves, the fintechs, and the regulators, I think really is the way to go. If you look at what we've learned over the last 2 years, and the fact that everyone talks about COVID as this accelerant on the digital fire, and it really accelerated all of these moves to going branchless and cashless, what are some of the insights that you can share around that shift towards contactless payments that we've seen since COVID?
So definitely from a Nedbank perspective, we saw a lot of take up from a contactless payments perspective. And I think that's just because people are conscious and we all wanted to be extremely safe. So we saw, if I can just think about, hopefully I'm right, but I think we saw about 40 to 50% uptake or click up in terms of our contactless payments. So that's really, really important, and that's encouraging in itself. But what I also do think is that once you have that collaboration that you spoke about beginning to happen, because payments is interesting. Payments is not a one-man show. Payments it's a couple of people coming together and deciding to do something great and awesome. And that those great and awesome people is a fintech, it's a bank, it's a regulator, it's a telco, maybe a retailer. So effectively, you want those people to come together, because that is the only way you can make payments meaningful and you can make them accessible. So that's extremely important, the collaboration, deciding on standards. But also what I think is really important, and the point that you mentioned around fintech saying it's an endless beauty parade. I've been on the other side, on the fintech side before this. And I think what's important is that, so what we're seeing is that when the whole fintech thing started and fintechs were coming through, we were also excited, and they still do awesome stuff. But what we're beginning to see is a consolidation within all the markets, particularly the mature ones as well. Why? Because you begin to realize that fintechs and banks need to coexist. So one can never live outside of the other. And that ability to learn when to coexist and how to coexist is essentially what's going to make everybody or make this successful. And fintechs must also take up the compliance responsibility, as do banks. So I always say, when I was on the other side, you want to do all the sexy stuff and have a great app, but you don't want to tick the boxes, dot the I's and cross the T's. You have to do that. And that's compliance, particularly with payments, because like you said, our regulator is one of the most strictest regulators globally, believe it or not. So we do well, but we're also quite strict. And that's why we just need to be cognizant of our macro environment in which we operate, particularly when we deliver these payment capabilities.
Important. I mean, one talks about the rise of cryptocurrencies, for example, and pick your cryptocurrency. Is it going to replace fiat? I can't see any sovereign in the world allowing, with all the regulation we have in the formalized banking system, to stop illicit financial flows, funding of terrorism, that kind of thing, allowing a currency that is effectively in dark pools and unregulated to become something that replaces the established. It's understandable, right? The regulations are there for a very important reason when it comes to stopping those kinds of illicit activities. Now, when you see the other side of this, so if we come back to the strengths of going cardless, and obviously we've mentioned the costs. If we can bring the cost down, that's obviously one of the big ones. What do you see as the major strengths of going cardless in Africa today?
So cash is very expensive. I think for all economies, cash is extremely expensive, and also there's safety issues around cash. So I think that's a big plus. That's why we all want to either go cardless, because once you go cardless, effectively you contribute to cashless. So it's almost like two sides of the same coin. And that's why the conversation starts around a cashless economy. And when we talk about cardless, I mean, right now we've got digital wallets that we have. Some of you might be using Apple Pay. And at Nedbank, we're excited because we've got Apple Pay, we've got Samsung Pay, and there's another one that's coming through in the market as well. We've got Fitbit Pay and Garmin Pay. So all those are sort of digital wallets that effectively you can use without having to carry your card around, and you don't need to. Now, the downside to that would be particularly some of the sort of what we see, you can say cannibalization from traditional financial services, but that then is supplemented as well, because then you see more transactions coming through, more volumes coming through. Yesterday, I forgot my wallet and I was at the mall with my mom, and I had my Apple Watch with me. And I think after 2 stores, it said updating your cards. And then I had my phone with me. So effectively, I just used my phone. And I didn't need to carry anything else. That's the beauty of where we are with digitized payments. So I think it's really, really important that we make sure that all of us understand it and are able to use it.
I mentioned in the beginning that I like using Zapper and SnapScan, and there are many others. But what I'm finding a little bit as a user here, clumsy with the whole experience, is that I've got to go and use a different app depending on which merchant is offering which service and that kind of thing. There clearly are still some barriers associated with digital payments and challenges. What do you see as some of the big ones?
So the one that you've just mentioned is probably the biggest, and we call it interoperability. So interoperability says you're able to transact from any device, anytime, anywhere, and you're able to complete your transaction successfully. So one of the things we have right now, particularly in the QR code space, is that there's a fragmentation around service providers. And there's a lot of conversations that have been happening. You might be happy to know that have been happening over the last 12 months or so, to bring that all together so that this clumsy or this experience that you have where you have to, do you take Zapper, do you take SnapScan, whatever, but also if you're a Nedbank client, for example, we've got Scan to Pay. So Scan to Pay allows you to scan any QR code as well. You don't have to move between different apps and all that other stuff. So that's the other stuff that's happening, that's there in the market for you to be able to use. So try Scan to Pay from Nedbank, and you'll be able to use it. But effectively, yes, interoperability is key and it's important. So interoperability also says, Michael, you can be standing at a retailer, for example, and be able to perform a transaction to myself seamlessly and easily. You're also able to do cross-border payments. So interoperability is probably the biggest thing that any industry globally has to solve for. And it's no small task, because everybody wants to own the customer. Everybody wants to be in front of the customer. Everybody wants to look good. So there's a bit of a bun fight, if you might call it, warranted, because people are investing money. But at the heart of it, if we think about the customer experience, interoperability becomes key, because once we solve for things like interoperability, even conversations around real-time settlement become also easier, because then you've standardized systems, processes, protocols, reporting mechanisms, settlement, etc. And those are the things we need to solve for. And it's banks, card associations, regulators that need to come together to be able to define what those parameters are, and then everybody else can participate.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that the conversation is being had to find a way around interoperability, or through it, through that, again, a good sense of collaboration there. But in the South African market, I speak about my personal experience, but my personal experience might be very different to someone who lives in the Kasi economy and takes a taxi to and from work every day and has different needs and different approaches to payments. So what do you see as the specific dynamics around payments in our rather challenging market because of this broad spectrum of market segments?
So it's the South African market is so exciting, but it's really quite nuanced. And at the very beginning, I spoke about ensuring that you digitize the entire value chain. So I can go to Soweto today with all these great digital payment capabilities I have at my disposal, but they fall flat if I get there and the merchant or the township trader is not able to receive those. So when we talk about digitizing the entire value chain, those are some of the things that we actually need to do. And it's a lot of hard work because there's financial education that you need to do, not just around the technology, but how to use it and what it means. Because unless we're able to mimic how cash operates, then digital payments are not going to be as enticing or exciting for the guy that catches taxes all the time. So when I give you 5 rands, you know it's 5 rands. You will not question that I've given you 5 rands. But if I in a taxi and I say, I've paid my 5 rands using whatever, and there's so many stuff out there to be used, the driver is sitting there thinking, I don't trust you. I might not see you again. What if I check on my app or whatever and I don't have the 5 rands? So unless we're able to mimic how cash operates, I think we are a long way away from solving some of these nuances that we have within the South African market around making sure that digital payments are accessible and digital payments are found everywhere and with the people that actually need them. 85% of the people have got bank accounts, but do they use them? Yeah. Most of these people have got debit cards, but they don't use them. And so why don't they use them? These are the things that we need to unpack from the South African economy and make sure that we solve for that, because you want to pay your gardener or you want to pay a casual worker that's come to your house to fix something. All these things are serious pain points. You want to pay the car guard, for example. Yeah. We have all these issues that are happening around us, and we cannot seem to progress, but we need these digital payment capabilities to be made available and the education to go out and the regulator to help us drive them, and then we can make sure that they are in the hands of everybody that needs them. And we can drive the South African economy.
Well, that's the bottom line here. I mean, if you do open up and unlock the informal part of the equation as well, I think there is a massive opportunity there. And my mind always is drawn to a presentation at Pick and Pay's results where I think it was Richard Brasher put up the slide, the top 4 listed retailers. And then the pie chart was predominantly the informal market, so the spaza, the wholesaler, and just how big that market is. And if you can reduce costs and friction and pain points there and help that part of the economy grow, it really will help turbocharge South Africa's economic growth. And we need it right now. Looking forward, what do you see if you gaze into your crystal ball? And I hope it's not cracked. What are some of those future trends that are influencing payments in 5 years' time? Obviously, technology is one angle. And you've mentioned it, there's changing regulatory requirements, and will the regulator, enable innovation? What do you see as the big trends?
Well, firstly, if my crystal ball was cracked, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. So it's not supposed to be cracked. I should be able to see through towards something. But if I just think in the next 5, 10 years, whatever, the vision of either consumers, businesses, or institutions is really being able to receive and send either domestic and cross-border payments instantly, 24/7, 365. That's important. That's key. And it has to come with full transparency, and we need to make it a reality, right? The destination is clear, but the how to, again, like we've just been unpacking, is really something that we have to solve for. And we've got all these new initiatives, and like I said, all these technologies that are out there, and there's multiple parts that are sort of emerging, whether it's that real-time payments, we talk about blockchain, digital currencies, or something else. I think it's really important for ourselves as Nedbank to stay abreast of this and all the banks, but also that collaboration and that coming to be together to be able to provide a comprehensive suite of payment solutions, both new and old, is really going to be key in driving the socioeconomic growth of this country. So it's going to be a mixture of things. some lag and lead sort of technologies coming together. There's a lot of stuff that's happening out there, and we need to understand what do we need to do from a South African perspective? What do we need to drive forward socioeconomic development? How do we need to support entrepreneurs? How do we need to support the gig economy? How do we need to support the creators economy? There's all these things that are happening around us. And it's such an amazing time to be alive, because it's not just a challenge like we spoke at the very beginning, but the opportunities that exist are actually immense. And I'm excited that Nedbank is at the forefront of all these sort of trends that we see coming through and emerging.
Well, a great conversation. Thank you very much, Chipo Mushwana, Divisional Executive of Emerging Payments at Nedbank, talking to us about the role of payments in building society, rebuilding the economy, and bringing in the base of the pyramid and really transforming through innovation. A fantastic time, as you say, to be involved in the payment space. Loving the FinTech conference here on Business Tech. Stay right there. We've got another great speaker lined up just after this.